Alright, hello everyone. I'm doing something a little different tonight. I've noticed that with a lot of this Ukraine and Russia stuff, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of developments, and I know a lot of people are having a hard time keeping up with it, myself included, so I just thought it would be a good idea to kind of talk through exactly what is happening on a day-to-day basis, just for not only your understanding, but my understanding too, because it seems like every morning I'm waking up and we're going to war or we're not. So I just thought that this would be a good way for me to kind of go over everything that happens every day and kind of just help myself analyze it, maybe have you guys have some input too, because at the end of the day, you guys are bringing up a lot of the points that I think a lot of people are wondering about, and I think that it's just good to go over this stuff, acknowledging what's on the line. I mean, we're at a point right now where there's either the prospect for peace or we're going to war with another nuclear superpower. So I think that this is just a good way to kind of decompress of what we're going through every day and kind of look at exactly what's going on so we can get a better understanding of it, because it's an important topic. So I think that everybody knows that at this point, the day was that waking up this morning, Russia's Ministry of Defense said that they would be pulling back some troops away from the Ukrainian border. That was something that followed on the backdrop of a lot of Western intelligence saying that this week was going to be the time where Russia was going to invade Ukraine. Of course, that's still a possibility at this point, as President Biden said today during his address. So, I mean, we're still at the same point that we were just a couple of months ago, really, at this point. How long have we been following this for, where it seems like every single day there's a closer step to that line of, will Russia end up having an incursion into Ukraine? If it's a small one, will there be an invasion? There's a lot going on. So waking up this morning and seeing that there were going to be some developments on that front, positive developments, I should say, was a promising sign. But I think that a lot of people know at this point that when you're dealing with Russia in particular, you can't take those comments at face value. Russia, I mean, say what you want about Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin, but they've certainly made information warfare a center point of what they're looking to do in the entire world, whether it comes back to the United States, whether what's happening in Eastern Europe. It's something that's certainly at the line right there. It's something that they put at the forefront, I should say, of what's going on. And we saw that in different avenues today, not only with them kind of trying to set the narrative with saying that they're going to start pulling back some of the troops from the Russian border, but we'll get to something else that a lot of people are looking at too concerning the cyber front. But the big headline, no doubt, today was that coming into this, the Russian Ministry of Defense said that they were going to be pulling back some of their troops. Russian President Vladimir Putin confirmed that during his press conference with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. But once again, as President Biden mentioned in his presser earlier today, they haven't verified that to any degree. And it's not just President Biden who's saying that right now. Very early in the day, the NATO Secretary General was saying the same thing. The European Union was saying the same thing, that yes, that would be a promising development. But at this point, there's no concrete action to really go off of at this point. And I think that there's an interesting thing that a lot of people at home actually have brought up. It's the idea that we are seeing a lot of these videos coming through of these troop movements taking part within Russia, going into Belarus, going up to Ukraine as well. But a lot of those videos are being posted by anonymous accounts, and there's two ways to look at that. These are whistleblowers within Russia waving the flag saying this is what's happening right now, or it could possibly be that these are coming once again from the Kremlin itself, that this is maybe Russian intelligence putting it out there, saying, trying to leverage their weight in some way, saying, you know, we are moving troops up to the border. There's a lot of differing narratives going on, whether it's U.S. intelligence, Ukrainian intelligence, Russian intelligence, but there are verifiable things. Let's be clear about that. At this point, we can look at satellite imagery, and we can see that there's no doubt that there's a large movement of Russian troops going closer to Ukraine. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt that the Russian government has been very clear about their intent to not only put troops there, but heavy artillery, tanks, all of this equipment. Now, of course, they're saying that this is for nothing more than just exercises, something that they maintain is temporary. But I think that at this point, it's fair to say that why is it taking place along the Ukrainian border? I understand that they want to deter NATO. They want to make sure that really they aren't encroached upon when their sovereignty when it comes to NATO, but it's a broken record at this point. NATO is a defensive mechanism. It's not necessarily an aggressor in this sense, but there's no doubt that at this point Russia does want to have a buffer of some sort between other European nations, NATO nations in particular, and then of course what's happening in Russia. I mean, Putin says it all the time. He doesn't want missile-capable systems being 5 minutes away from hitting Moscow. So you can kind of understand where Russia's coming from in this. Of course, you can take issue with how they're approaching this diplomacy. But there's no doubt that at least today there seemed to be a promise that Putin was willing to go to diplomacy to some degree. Now, this, of course, all falling on the backdrop of Western intelligence saying that this week there could be an invasion into Ukraine. We heard Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky just last night saying that there could be an invasion taking place as soon as Wednesday, before walking that back and saying he was being ironic. And even that statement right there, you have to look at what he's doing. He's essentially mocking the information that's coming out from the United States, European allies, because the U.S. has been the one sounding the alarms this entire time, while Ukraine, for example, has been saying, you know what, let's be calm here. Let's not get ahead of ourselves or anything like that. And I think those two different approaches are important to analyze, because from the White House perspective, there's nothing to lose by raising the alarms right now. If Russia were to invade Ukraine, the White House can say, that's what we were warning you about. We told you so. But if Russia were to all of a sudden remove some of its troops away from the Ukrainian border and say that we want to start practicing diplomacy, then you have a different story right there. Then the White House can say, we staved off this crisis. This was our doing along with NATO allies, and we were really successful in making sure that there wasn't an invasion taking place. So that's where the United States is coming from, whereas Ukraine, it's an existential crisis if Russia were to invade. And they know that if they were to announce the alarms right now, say that this is Russia's coming, we can't compete with their military, that would be horrible for morale of the people, the economy would be decimated, and maybe people would just, quite frankly, go to this anarchical form of resistance. I mean, we've already seen civilians taking up arms, preparing for this guerrilla warfare to deter an invasion by Russia if one were to take place. And we've even heard Ukrainian officials say over the past couple of weeks that a worst case scenario, they would just open up their weapons depots, let the Ukrainian people go in there, take what they need so they can defend for themselves. So that's the situation that Ukraine is in right now. And but there's also something to be said about these troops returning back to their bases. We don't necessarily know where these troops are being withdrawn from, where they're going back to, how many. We don't have any details, and that's what all the Western allies are saying, that we need evidence of some sort that this is going to happen, because at this point, we're just taking Russia's word for it. We're going off of a video that the Russian Ministry of Defense uploaded saying, look, we're putting tanks on trains, but that doesn't really get anyone anywhere. And you had these competing storylines, as I was saying, on both sides. Russia, of course, is going to put out their information, disinformation. But even the United States, we have not gotten the evidence that we're looking for from the Pentagon, from the White House, all of these people put together. In fact, over the past couple of weeks, we've seen some reporters really pressing the spokespeople from the Pentagon and the White House saying, we need the evidence behind this. The fact that you're declassifying this information and just saying there might be a false flag, things of that nature, that's not enough to justify perhaps taking a strong line approach against Russia in that sense, because of course a lot of people, maybe justifiably so, are a little bit weary of taking the government's word for it. I know that a lot of people covering the Pentagon and the White House right now lived through the Iraq War. They've lived through false information. They've just recently with Afghanistan, they've gone through their own point before of saying, you know, we were given all this information, told that Kabul wouldn't fall, that we had a strong presence there, that the Afghani people were going to be really behind the United States and try to continue their legacy even after the troops are gone. We know that's not the case. Now, even over the past couple of hours, we know that the Russian legislature called on President Putin. They voted in favor of calling on President Putin to acknowledge this part of eastern Ukraine, this Russian-speaking region, to be independent. And what that could actually be is the beginning stages of a pretext for an attack. And I say this because even today, Russian President Vladimir Putin once again said that the treatment of the Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine amounted to genocide. That's the second or third time he's made that reference in the past couple of weeks. And that type of very harsh rhetoric, that could be used as a pretext for Russia to just go in there. And I say that in the sense where it wouldn't be a full-scale invasion, but perhaps a temporary incursion so that they could go in there, set up their own government, and that's one way of doing it without having to completely take over Ukraine and try to hold it the same way, because it's worth mentioning that Russia has its own Afghanistan moment as well. It's a little bit further away, but people know that Russia had tried to go into Afghanistan, tried to do a little bit of nation building as their own, only to see that they were unsuccessful at doing so. And for a lot of people in Russia, that's a blemish on their legacy. I mean, the Russian people are a very proud people in that sense, and that's one of the reasons you could argue why President Putin is doing all of this. The fact that he wants to return a little bit to the former USSR days, where there was more of a sense of national pride and just support behind the country in a way that maybe they're not feeling right now. But when it comes to U.S. intelligence too, I mean, I just want to bring up this point that, I mean, it wasn't too long ago when we were talking about the idea of Russian bounties. I mean, remember when U.S. intelligence was telling they were telling reporters who were relaying the message to the public that the Russians were paying Taliban fighters to kill American soldiers. I mean, it was a major headline for the longest time. Of course, a lot of people trying to pin that on President Trump, saying he had that information, didn't bring it up in his meetings with Russian President Vladimir Putin. But as we know, that didn't necessarily to be true. I mean, in fact, here's this NBC News article. Remember those Russian bounties for dead U.S. troops? Biden administration says the CIA intel is not conclusive. The Biden administration made clear that the CIA has only low moderate confidence in its intel on alleged Russian bounties for U.S. troops. And that was just a couple months ago. I mean, April of 2021. And the story itself broke about probably about a year prior to that. But we only are now learning that intelligence was bunk. I mean, it was basically false. So that kind of speaks to the idea of it's not too much to ask to see the evidence behind some of these claims being made by U.S. intelligence. We know that Russian intelligence is not going to be upfront or anything like that, but as an American journalist, as an American populace, I think it's important to at least ask for that. But where are we right now? The idea is that earlier today, President Putin said that he would be willing to take part in a little bit more diplomacy. Yesterday, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, in a very public way, was kind of pressing President Putin to take part in a little bit more diplomacy. And there are some concerns that Putin's inner circle is small, too small. The idea that perhaps he's not being given a realistic expectation of what it would take to really launch an invasion into Ukraine, let alone hold that down. I already talked about the civilian population who's ready to take up arms, who's really, essentially willing to fight to the end of all this. And it's one thing to, get troops to Kyiv, but it's another thing to hold that land, especially among a populace who just doesn't want to be controlled by Russia. And I think that is something that Putin may be waking up to a little bit, because, there's got to be something said about this recent change in posture. Because, think about it this way. At this point, what has Putin gained? I find it very hard to believe that he's okay with the situation as it is if he's just going to walk away, because at this point, all he's really done is strengthen NATO in Eastern Europe. There's been more forces. There's been more equipment brought to the eastern part of Europe. He's strengthened Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, who, if he overcomes this crisis, is going to be a major popular figure in this sense. He took on Russia head on. He avoided this crisis and did so in a way that really challenged the Kremlin in a way that maybe hasn't been done in the past, especially in that region. Belarus just to the north is essentially a Russian proxy regime. So I think that is a winning situation for not only Ukraine, NATO, Western allies, and a losing situation for Putin. So, if you're taking what Putin is doing at face value, it looks like a good situation as of right now for the West, for Ukraine, for the United States, and not necessarily for Russian President Vladimir Putin or even his people to that degree, assuming, nobody wants war, but politically, the optics of it just look a little bit different. So Putin's saying that he wants diplomacy, but then something interesting happening a little bit later in the day. Cyber attacks hit government sites, major banks. A cyber attack hits the websites of the Ukrainian government agencies, major banks. The latest is several hacking operations targeting Ukraine and coming after weeks of escalating fears that Russia might invade its neighboring country. So that's a pretty big situation right there too, because there was a time where the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs website was completely down. It said it was going through some maintenance, but then the banks as well. And it's important to note that yes, hacking is something that Russia has become a little bit infamous for, whether it's been in the United States, whether it's been other parts of the world. Now, of course, there is a degree of separation. Oftentimes, it ends up being Russian entities and not the Russian government. But I think that there's a lot of conversations going on about what that necessarily entails. But I thought that this story was a little bit interesting because It wasn't too long ago where I remembered reading this headline right here. Ukraine hit by massive cyber attack on government websites. This is back just last month. Ukraine has been hit by a massive cyber attack with the websites of several government departments, including the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, once again, and the Education Ministry being knocked out. Officials said it was too early to draw any conclusions, but they pointed to a long record of Russian cyber assaults against Ukraine, with the attack coming after security talks between Moscow and the U.S. and its allies this week ended in a stalemate. That was just last month, and we never really got too many answers about that since then. I think that a lot of moving parts happened and this was kind of put to the back burner, but I think that in the type of conflict that we're talking about right here, there's a lot of focus on the potential of a hot war taking place, but I don't think that many people realistically believe that the United States or NATO is going to get into a hot conflict with Russia over Ukraine, a country that is not a NATO member state. It wouldn't be an immediate threat to France, Germany, Italy, the United States. I just don't think that that is something that many people were necessarily anticipating. So I think that this is something that we could look at a little bit more. I mean, we already talk about the disinformation that's being flooded into Ukraine by Russia. This is something to keep an eye on too. And, you know, it wasn't too long ago, actually. It was just, I believe, last week. Right here, European banks told to step up cyber attack defenses amid Russia-Ukraine crisis. Banks across the Eurozone are being told to increase their cyber defenses, with the region's regulatory saying this issue should be a top priority amid heightened geopolitical tensions. And then fast forward to this week, fast forward to today, and look what we're looking at. It wasn't just the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs that was hit, but it was also two major state-run banks. I mean, there were reports of people not being able to use the app, not being able to withdraw money from the ATM. So this is something that we were looking at today after warnings just last week, and then a similar attack taking place almost a month ago. So this is something that I could see ramping up in a lot of ways. I mean, this could be something where Putin, for example, removes some of the troops back and says, okay, you know what, we'll take part in diplomacy, but there are still other ways to really delegitimize the Ukrainian government within the rebel-held areas of Ukraine where maybe there's more Russian support. I mean, they could do so by infusing propaganda, disinformation campaigns, but this is something too that could have some serious effects for not only the Ukrainian government, but the people of Ukraine as well. And, you know, I want to touch on one more thing on exactly the troop movements that are taking place in Russia right now. Because, once again, I said this at the beginning of the broadcast, that we don't know where these troops are being pulled back from. We don't know how many. We don't even necessarily know where they're going. A lot of people on social media have pointed out that some of the actual bases are closer to Ukraine than the parts where they were taking part in drills. So these movements, we're not necessarily getting too much. And the Wall Street Journal has a really good visual of all of these movements taking place. You can see the different parts on this map right here of where people are coming from. I'm sorry, where the troops are being stationed right now. The big part is right here, I want to point out, by Belarus. These are where a lot of the drills are taking place. And then, of course, in Russia, along the Ukrainian border, to the southern port right there, there's Crimea. That's the Russian annexed area that was annexed back in 2014. So Russia does have a presence there, and we know that Russian warships are in the Black Sea. So for Moscow to suggest that there's nothing to worry about, that they have no intent to invade, I mean, you could just look at this map right here. There's reason to be concerned if you're a Ukrainian right now. I mean, they're surrounded from all sides. They really only have that little bit of a flank by Poland, Romania, where they could have NATO support. But I mean, they're looking at a potentially dangerous situation, especially when you look at Kyiv right there, how close it is to Belarus. I mean, U.S. intelligence briefed lawmakers just last week saying that Kyiv could be reached in less than 72 hours if Russia wanted to do so. And that's such an important point to note, because that may be what this is all about. Maybe Zelensky is the target here and not necessarily Ukraine as a whole, but it would be a very harmful situation. And they said that tens of thousands of Ukrainian people would be put in harm's way. So it's a very dire situation. But part of this graphic that I also want to show too is how far these people are coming, or these troops are coming from. I mean, you look at Ukraine right there, and you look at these lines that show where they were coming from. I mean, all the way in eastern Russia, Siberia, along the border with Mongolia and China, all coming this way towards Ukraine. I mean, it does kind of set up the situation of why a lot of people are concerned here. So, I mean, any hint that there could be a troop withdrawal, a pullback, I should say, is a promising development. But if you just look at right there, I mean, there would have to be a pretty major withdrawal at this point for it to mean anything. I mean, we see videos online, for example, of tanks, armored artillery, even warplanes I saw today flying over the Donbas region, close to it, I should say, which is a rather unprecedented thing. I mean, there's 130,000 troops lined up along the Ukrainian border. I mean, if we're talking about a withdrawal of 5,000 troops, 15,000, that really doesn't say anything in the big picture of things. So when you look at right here what's going on, it looks like, yes, there's a promising sign at diplomacy, but I think we're still a long ways away from really getting out of this conflict altogether, especially acknowledging the fact that Russia hasn't gotten anything of what they're asking for right here. I mean, you've got to remember what they want is to make sure that Ukraine never becomes part of NATO, that NATO artillery and missile systems aren't stationed in Ukraine, that no former USSR country can ever be part of NATO. At this point, they haven't got any security demands on any of that. And in fact, we're still waiting for the response from Russia to the United States response to their demands, essentially saying we're not going to give you any of that stuff. But we did see perhaps a sign from Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky saying that yes, he wants to be part of NATO, but perhaps it's just a dream at this point. That's what he's saying. That's not necessarily something to take at face value. Maybe he's saying that for negotiation's sake, but there's no doubt that he's not getting exactly what he wants. Russia's not getting exactly what he wants. And I think that it's important to address the perspective of where Ukraine is coming from right now too, because at this point, if Russia invades, the penalty applied by the US and Western allies is sanctions. That is something that I think everyone is pretty much on board with at this point if it comes to an invasion. But for Ukraine, that's too late. At that point, the harm is done. They've already lost their sovereignty. They've already been invaded by Russia, at least had an incursion take place by Russia. At that point, it's too late. That's why Zelensky and Ukraine want NATO membership. They want that initial deterrence so that if Russia were to ever launch an attack into Ukraine, they would be able to say, I mean, okay, well, now you have to fight France, Germany, the United States, all NATO allies would come to our defense. They don't have that right now. And there's a debate about whether Ukraine should be part of NATO, things like that. But at the end of the day, they just don't have that assurance as of right now. And I think that that's an important assurance to look at because that's really what this all comes down to, right? Putin wants a buffer between Europe and his country. Ukraine wants the assurance that they can be part of NATO, get the defense guarantee from that. That's just not happening. But so here we are. We're at the same place. In fact, I want to bring up this, I believe it was the Daily Mirror article. They're standing by their guns, in fact, in a very aggressive way. They say Russian invasion of Ukraine set for 3 a.m. tomorrow with missiles and tank attacks. Intelligence sources state Russia's invasion of Ukraine will begin on Wednesday afternoon with Europe on the brink of war, despite Vladimir Putin pulling back some of his country's forces. Now, I'm not buying this, just to be clear. I don't think there's any rationale for Putin to launch an invasion tomorrow. I don't think he has anything to gain by doing it after showing this willingness to at least cooperate to some degree. It just wouldn't be a good look on the international stage. I don't think he'd get a lot of negotiations for it, but nonetheless, I thought I'd bring it to your attention just because, I mean, initially Wednesday was the date where this was supposed to be taking place, right? I mean, that's what Western intelligence was saying. That's what even Zelensky was commenting on just last night before walking back his joke, I guess. I don't know, maybe he should have stuck to comedy. But so that's kind of the roundup of exactly what is going on because, I mean, a lot of moving parts today. And I just want to actually revisit one part that happened earlier today when German Chancellor Olaf Scholz was meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Putin's big sell was, you know, throughout this entire pandemic, throughout this entire conflict, Russia has never disrupted the supply chain to Germany. And I thought that just kind of spoke volumes because it really touches on what the relationship is between Russia and Germany at this point. Because Germany, Olaf Scholz, when he visited President Biden at the White House, he didn't even address the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, didn't mention it once. And he's been very hesitant to say that he'd be willing to shut it down outright if Russia were to launch an invasion or an incursion into Ukraine. Because at the end of the day, Germany is pretty addicted to Russian natural gas and oil. I mean, it's a major importer of it. They need it, and they know that right now with supply chain issues going on, with inflation going on, yes, that's happening in Europe, not just the United States, that if you were to eliminate a major source of energy, that would start, the people would start feeling that. There would be political backlash Olaf Scholz, of course, just coming into the government, replacing German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who was in the position, I believe, for 16 years, something like that. So he's kind of the fresh face. He's still got a lot to prove here. There's a crisis taking place at his border right off the bat. So, I mean, he's been hesitant to take any type of hardline stance when it comes to even sanctions, to be honest. But the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is something in particular. So Putin trying to play into that, kind of speaking to him in economic terms, saying, we've never disrupted the supply chain, we've got a good relationship. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see on the backdrop of the Ministry of Defense saying that they're going to be withdrawing some troops. Putin's pitch to Germany was, well, also economically, we've still got your back, at least as of right now. And at the end of the day, money talks, right? I mean, I know that President Biden wants to put on a united front when it comes to NATO, but I know that France is one of those countries too, behind the scenes, that has been very hesitant to apply very strict sanctions early on because there's also some dependence right there. Italy as well. I know that Mario Draghi just yesterday had a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Those readouts are always very surface level, where I talked about the sovereignty of states and cooperation, but Italy too. I mean, it's one of those countries where the ties between Russia and Italy are very much so existent, and they don't want to disrupt it. I mean, the same way that Russia and NATO have their adversarial ways, Russia is in many ways part of Europe the same way those other countries are, but in just a very different sense. And so I think that's something to keep in mind when we're looking at all of this. Yes, it's mostly the United States versus Russia when you're watching United States media, but there's a little bit more nuance when you come to Europe, and even in Ukraine. I mean, they've been in this situation now for almost 8 years. They're not surprised by this. We have very talented reporters on the ground, Sarah Williamson, Chuck Holton, who have been in Eastern Europe on the front lines, actually. They had great reports today kind of highlighting what that looks like. But they talk to people in Ukraine, and people in Ukraine are essentially saying, like, yeah, this is what we've been dealing with. I mean, this is nothing new. We're going to follow our government's information. We're going to kind of stand by each other. But we've been kind of dealing with this type of stuff for the past 8 years. You guys are just now kind of waking up to it. So I thought that was kind of an interesting point. But as we're getting to the 12:30 my time, 6:30 your time on the East Coast, I just wanted to wrap this up and kind of say that this is helpful for me. I like talking through this stuff. I hope you guys get something out of it too. I stream this on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Facebook. Eventually it's going to be on Instagram and TikTok as well. But I just do that so you guys can participate, because, every day I'm addicted to Twitter, unfortunately, but I'll be posting stuff and you guys will be DMing me or commenting on it, and it's very insightful for me. And I'll read stuff that I didn't see before. A lot of you are from Ukraine, Eastern Europe, and it's just very advantageous for me. And so I thought that I'd try to engage a little bit more with you guys, because I mean, it's one thing to read an article, but I mean, seeing what you guys are seeing on the internet and seeing what you guys are seeing in your own life experiences, that's something that is unparalleled. And I mean, the more minds, the better too. So don't ever hesitate to reach out to me. I try to respond to everyone as much as I can. I try to read everything that you guys send me as well. But yeah, I just thought that this was kind of important to do, not only for my hopefully you guys get a little bit something out of it too. I'm gonna try to keep these up throughout the week, especially days when there's a lot of information. Hopefully it's not always going to be so hard hitting. Hopefully we get some good news. We can crack some jokes and I don't know, make fun of me a little bit. By the way, for anyone who just sees me on Newsmax in a suit, this is what I look like in normal everyday life after getting back from the gym, I guess. So I don't know, deal with it, because that's what however many years of evolution got to this point. So here I am. What more do you want from me? But for everybody that's watching, I really appreciate it. Once again, I'm serious. Take me up on that offer to reach out to me with anything at all. Send me information. I try to read everything. So you can follow me on all those different accounts too. Reach out to me on different accounts. You can also participate on this too. There's chat boards and stuff if you ever want to do it. Share links, whatever. But I'm going to let you guys enjoy the rest of your night. Once again, I really appreciate you guys tuning in. I hope that tomorrow when we meet, there's a little bit more of a positive development. But until then, thanks for watching, everyone.